Emotional blackmail. Emotional blackmail involves making someone feel guilty or nervous to get them to agree with demands. The manipulator uses threats, silent treatment, or hints of serious consequences to pressure the victim. For example, a partner might say, "If you really loved me, you would do this for me," making the other person feel forced to act against their will to prove their love. This tactic takes advantage of emotional ties and vulnerabilities to control the victim. Triangulation. Triangulation involves bringing a third party into a conflict or relationship to manipulate the conditions. The manipulator uses this third person to create jealousy, competition, or to shift the blame. For example, a parent might compare their child unfavorably to a sibling to induce feelings of unworthiness. This tactic creates confusion and division, weakening the victim's position and strengthening the manipulator's control over the situation. Love bombing. Love bombing is an excessive display of attention and affection designed to overwhelm the victim. Initially, the manipulator showers the target with praise, gifts, and constant contact, creating an intense emotional bond. Once the victim is hooked, the manipulator can start to control and manipulate. This tactic is often used in abusive relationships to quickly establish dependence, making the victim less likely to recognize or object to future manipulative behavior. Projection. Projection involves accusing others of their own undesirable traits or behaviors. The manipulator denies their own faults and instead puts them in the hands of the victim. For instance, an unfaithful person might accuse their partner of cheating. This lie not only confuses the victim, but also shifts attention away from the manipulator's own wrongdoings, allowing them to avoid accountability and manipulate the victim's view of reality. Guilt tripping. Guilt tripping is making someone feel responsible for causing harm or failing to meet expectations. The manipulator uses guilt to control the victim's actions and decisions. For example, a friend might say, "After all I've done for you, you can't do this one thing." This tactic capitalizes on the victim's sense of duty and empathy, pushing them to obey out of guilt rather than their own free will. Negging. Negging involves giving rude compliments or discreet insults to undermine the victim's confidence. The manipulator aims to make the victim seek validation and approval. For example, saying, "You're pretty smart for someone who didn't go to college," creates self-doubt. This tactic lowers the victim's self-esteem, making them more dependent on the manipulator for approval and more vulnerable to further manipulation. Love withdrawal. Love withdrawal is the intentional removal of affection or attention to punish or control the victim. The manipulator stops offering love, comfort, or communication until the victim agrees to their demands. This tactic creates a fear of abandonment and increases the victim's dependency on the manipulator's approval and affection as they attempt to regain the lost love. Silent treatment. Silent treatment involves ignoring or refusing to communicate with the victim. The manipulator uses this tactic to punish, control, or make the victim feel unimportant. By cutting off interaction, the manipulator creates anxiety and insecurity in the victim, who is left guessing what they did wrong and how to fix it. Gaslighting is a psychological manipulation where the manipulator makes the victim doubt their own reality, memory, or mental health. They use lies, denial, and conflict to create confusion and self-doubt. For example, they might say, "That never happened," or "You're imagining things," even when the victim knows the truth. This tactic reduces the victim's confidence in their beliefs, making them more dependent on the manipulator for their sense of reality. Stonewalling. Stonewalling is the refusal to engage in communication or acknowledge the victim's concerns. The manipulator uses this tactic to avoid conflict or responsibility, making the victim feel helpless and frustrated. For example, a partner might walk away or change the subject whenever a difficult topic comes up. This tactic disregards the victim's feelings and prevents closure while maintaining the manipulator's control over the situation. Common enemy. Creating a common enemy involves uniting with the victim against an external threat or opponent. The manipulator escalates or creates conflicts to create a sense of friendship and loyalty. This tactic distracts the victim's attention from the manipulator's behavior and strengthens the emotional bond. By focusing on the external enemy, the victim becomes more trusting and dependent on the manipulator, who appears as an ally rather than a threat. Manipulative isolation. Manipulative isolation involves separating the victim from their support network of friends and family. The manipulator creates distance between the victim and others to increase dependency and control. They might spread rumors, create conflicts, or simply demand all the victim's time and attention. Blame shifting. Blame shifting involves making the victim responsible for the manipulator's mistakes or wrongdoings. The manipulator avoids accountability by turning the tables on the victim, saying things like, "This is all your fault," or "If you hadn't done that, I wouldn't have acted this way." This tactic confuses the victim and redirects attention away from the manipulator's behavior, making it harder for the victim to defend themselves or address the real issue. Intimidation. Intimidation uses threats, aggression, or hidden harm to control the victim. The manipulator creates fear and anxiety, making the victim follow out of fear. This can involve verbal threats, physical actions, or displaying anger. Intimidation establishes dominance and minimizes opposition as the victim prioritizes their safety over their liberation. The constant fear of extreme reaction keeps the victim under the manipulator's control. Love dependency. Love dependency is creating an unhealthy emotional relationship where the victim believes they cannot live without the manipulator's love. The manipulator creates this dependency by switching between intense affection and withdrawal. The victim becomes desperate for the manipulator's love, overlooking abusive behavior to maintain the relationship. This tactic traps the victim in a cycle of emotional highs and lows, making them more vulnerable to further manipulation. Future faking. Future faking involves making false promises about the future to control the victim's present actions. The manipulator talks about a wonderful future together, full of shared dreams and goals, to keep the victim attached. However, these promises are never fulfilled. This tactic keeps the victim hopeful and committed. Fear-mongering. Fear-mongering uses exaggerated threats or dangers to manipulate the victim's actions and decisions. The manipulator gives the victim the impression that problems or disasters are approaching, leaving them feeling helpless and dependent. For example, a manipulator might say, "If you leave me, you'll never survive on your own." This tactic takes advantage of the victim's fears to maintain control and discourage independent thinking or actions. Playing the victim. Playing the victim involves the manipulator presenting themselves as the one who is harmed or suffering. This tactic provokes sympathy and shifts focus away from their own behavior. By presenting themselves as vulnerable or mistreated, the manipulator manipulates the victim's emotions, making them feel guilty or responsible for the manipulator's situation. Exploitation of vulnerability. Exploitation of vulnerability involves using the victim's weaknesses, insecurities, or past traumas against them. The manipulator identifies and targets these vulnerabilities to control and manipulate. For example, they might exploit someone's fear of abandonment by threatening to leave. This tactic strengthens the victim's dependency on the manipulator, as they feel unable to escape or resist due to their own believed weaknesses or fears. Financial dependency. Financial dependency involves creating a situation where the victim is economically dependent on the manipulator. The manipulator controls the finances, limiting the victim's access to money and resources. This dependency makes it difficult for the victim to leave or challenge the manipulator, as they fear financial instability or poverty. By controlling the finances, the manipulator ensures the victim remains trapped and dependent, reducing their ability to gain independence or seek help. Make sure to like and subscribe, and let us know in the comments what the next video should be about.